here, we knew that there was a lot of interest and people wanted to hear him and see him. Now, having said that, what I will ask of everyone to do, please, is to try to refrain from having conversations. I know normally when you go out to eat, you want to have conversations with your friends, right? But let's have this conversation here. I'm going to be asking a few questions of Tim, and then we'll open it up as a conversation with the community. So if you're standing next to someone who's speaking, just tap them on the shoulder slightly and say, save it till after the conversation is over here. So we really appreciate everybody being here and taking the time and the patience you've had while we were trying to figure out the sound system. So hopefully everyone can hear now. Is everyone okay? Can everybody hear? All right? Everybody okay? All right, so hopefully we'll get everybody to be hearing. For the people in the front, we apologize, there's not enough space for everybody to sit down, but hopefully you're hearing what we're saying as well. And we'll give you the opportunity to ask questions maybe at the end. So, now before I start, we got a text just a few moments ago that Obama has put a stop to the Dakota pipeline. So we haven't gotten, we have some friends that are there, and they texted and they said that the camp went wild and crazy when that news came over the air. So it's very exciting to have us begin this conversation on such a positive note. You know, I don't know how many more positive notes we'll have to speak about in the future. So we just want to make sure that's out there. So we are, again, I'd like everyone please to kind of refrain from conversations until we're done. We really appreciate it. All right, thank you. So we are honored to have here with us Tim Rice. We've been trying to get him here for 11 years. He's finally here. He finally decided to come to his senses and show up. Of course, we never called him. That's the part of it. So he is the author of several books, including his memoir, White Like Me, Reflections on Race from a Privileged Son, Dear White America, which I just finished reading. It's a letter to a new minority. And Under the Affluence, Shaming the Poor, Praising the Rich, and Sacrificing the Future of America. He's among the nation's most prominent anti-racist writers and educators. He speaks extensively on race, racism, white privilege, white supremacy, and the like. Now, he's been called many things, including a vanilla brother in the tradition of John Brown.
All right.
Now, who could guess who would have said that? Kimon Freeman. Cornel West said that. He's also been called many other things, including a very destructive individual with racial paranoia. He panders to the racial paranoia industry.
It's David Horowitz.
David, very good guess. And too bad people with his intelligence seem to feel obligated to make it a growth industry as well. His analysis is intellectually paranoid. He's also been called the white Uncle Tom. That's by very good. He's guessing who's calling these things. That's pretty good. That's by Dinesh D'Souza, the writer and commentator.
Ex-felon.
Ex-felon. And he's also been called a white race traitor scum. And who was
some asshole, I don't know.
who would sicken this country by the National Association of the Advancement of White People.
Oh, that's it.
Okay, so I didn't know that existed, but it does. So that's so welcome to Busboys and Poets.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry we're going to have to do this back and forth microphone until we get the second microphone. But I wanted to ask Tim to make a comment about the name of this event, this program that we build as White and Woke. So it's White and Woke actually. So I want to be able to speak to him and say, what does it mean to be white and woke?
Well, are we okay? Can you hear me? Okay. So I do want to address that. In fact, I came in sort of wanting to address that and sort of push back a little bit on the title of the event, and I will do that. But I want to start actually before I do that, saying something that I think we need right now to be very clear on. You know, this morning, so I came in last night because I knew I was doing this event in the afternoon, early evening, and so this morning I went to the Museum of African American History and Culture, and it was a fascinating experience. If you haven't done it, you certainly should, if you can. I know it's hard to get in. I know the tickets are, you know, for the next several months, hard to come by. But what was sort of astounding to me about it, right, was as you go through this experience, and like any museum, it's not perfect, right? Like any historical retrospective, it's not perfect. But what struck me, and this is a museum that sits, what, 500 yards from the house that Donald Trump's about to occupy in January. And as I went through it and I saw the history of what black folk in this country have overcome and persevered through, it struck me that no matter what this man and his minions believe about this country, I've seen this game, I've seen this movie, and I assure you that black folks win in the end. Let me be clear. At the end of this game, black folks win, and folks of color generally win, as long as we continue to stand up and demand that they do. And there is very little, when you look at that history, black and brown folks have overcome far better than this man, far more problematic than this man, far more dangerous than this man. There is nothing that Trumpism has over George Wallace, over Lester Maddox, whose axe handle is in the museum. You know, there's a section of the museum where they're showing Klan members marching down, down Constitution Avenue, and 1925, and then gathering at the Washington Monument, which is right there, overlooking the museum. Thousands of Klan members in 1925 who ran the state government in Indiana, who ran local governments in states like Michigan and all around the country, Oregon, and all around the country, most of them not in the South, interestingly, as historians like Jim Loan, who was in the room, will tell you. So black and brown folks have overcome that, and we think that some dude that inherited $227 million worth of real estate assets from his daddy is going to somehow set black and brown folks back? You got to be kidding. If you believe that, you haven't met black people, you haven't studied history, and you haven't been to that museum. So let's be clear about that, number one. Now, as far as the title of this event, I think the reason that it concerned me, and it wasn't my title, but when it was offered to me, I decided I'm going to let it go, because I think it's actually a good jumping off point for the conversation. The idea of being white and woke to me is problematic, and I want every white person in the room to understand, if you don't already, the problematic nature of that, right? Because I think it's dangerous in the sense that when you say that someone is white and woke, right, and aware, conscious, committed to change of a system of white supremacy, the danger is that we look at wokeness as this finish line, right, as this place where you attain a certain level of awareness and then you're done. And you cross the finish line and you're there and everybody pats you on the back and says, oh man, you're white and woke. Hell, I was in the top 8 white and woke people in the room, whatever the hell that means. Like, I don't even know what that means. And the fact that they only found 8 of us tells you something, right? Like, they couldn't even find 10 and shit. Like, just, you normally round stuff up to 10. You find 10 people, they found 8. So it tells you something. Wokeness is a process. It's not an end point. It's not a thing that you cross the finish line. It's a process of discovery, right? And I think that the minute that any of us who are white decide, oh, we're woke now, we understand police brutality, or we understand white supremacy in education, or we understand the intersectionality of white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, straight supremacy, etc., then we stop learning. So to me, I think the problem in the title is it assumes that any of us, me included, are these finished products, when in fact we are learning things every day. We are learning things every day, mostly from people of color, who are reminding us of how much more learning we have to do, People of color are learning things every day. Like, nobody is fully woke. Everybody is having to examine this thing called white supremacy all the time. And so as long as we have the humility to acknowledge that whatever we think we know today, and it might be great compared to what we knew last week and 6 years ago, but we still have a lot to learn. And so to me, being white and woke, it's like, for me personally, I might not be in REM sleep anymore, but I'm not completely awake either. You know, I'm in that twilight sleep where you're sort of aware and you're still processing and you're still coming out of that deep sleep. And as long as we're honest enough to admit that, then we're open to the feedback that we need to hear as white folks to be real allies in the struggle, in solidarity with black and brown leadership. So I just wanted to say that up front so we're clear on that, and then we can talk about whatever the hell anybody wants to talk about. But I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
And thank you for the clarification. I think we see that the issue of race and the conversation is an ongoing one. That's why we call it a continuing talk on race, because it's not something you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I'm woke and I'm done. I think it's also a process. And being woke is recognizing the need to have this conversation and certainly the change along the way. So you brought up the big orange elephant in the room, you know, the election, and I think it's important for us to continue talking about that for a few more minutes, because I would venture to guess that maybe we would have had a few less people here had it not been for the election and the importance of this conversation at this moment in time. So I want to be able to talk to you a little bit more about the type of people that voted for Donald Trump himself maybe even, and you can only make guesses on that obviously, but did everyone that voted, I know a lot of people talked about, you know, economic anxiety. That's always a thing that comes up, like a lot of people voted for Trump because of economic anxiety. But I want to ask you something. I'm walking around and I'm seeing, the day after I went to Virginia, our family lives in Virginia, I'm walking around and I see like 10 people walking around. I said, 6 of you motherfuckers voted for this guy. And I'm really angry. And I don't mean to diss anybody here, but because I know that's not the group we have here. But I felt really, really upset. I felt really upset about the fact that so many people voted for him and supported him. I want to ask you, do you think all the people that voted for Donald Trump are racist?
So here's the thing, and I want to say this both as a matter of strategy for the left, but also as a matter of intellectual honesty. For those of us on the left who do anti-racism work, our argument is that everyone raised in a racist culture, particularly white folks raised in that culture, will have internalized a certain degree of racism. So to call someone racist as an individual is really like calling them an air breather. That shit doesn't tell us anything, right? The fact that somebody might be a racist, I would argue everyone raised in this kind of culture to some extent is on that continuum. So to me, I can't really answer that question by saying yes, because if I say yes, I mean, the answer is of course yes, because everyone is, I mean, in 08 when I wrote, or 09 when I wrote Between Barack and a Hard Place, because I'm clever like that, so that's how I picked that title. My argument then was, number one, everybody that voted against Obama didn't do it because of racism, and number two, some of y'all that voted for his ass are still racist. And I know that because the data told me that. There was data the month before the election in 08 that said 40% of white Democrats admitted that they still agreed with certain negative stereotypes about black folks, but they were cool with that one. Right? They made him the Cliff Huxtable of politics, and I know that's like a tortured ass reference right about now. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's absurd to talk about, oh, these voters are racist, these voters are not racist. You know, I think all voters raised in a racist culture have a certain degree of that in us. The question is, was racial animus, anxiety, resentment, bigotry at the root of their vote? Now, that's an important question. Am I going to say that that was the key for everybody? No, because that would be overly simplistic. There are multiple electorates in any election, right? There are those of us who probably voted for Hillary Clinton, not because we were necessarily down with her, but because we made a determination about the lesser of two evils. There were folks that voted for Jill Stein for that same reason. There are folks that voted for Johnson for that same reason. There are folks that didn't vote for that same reason. There are lots of motivations. But here's the thing. We know it's not. Here's what we know it's not. It's not economic anxiety in a vacuum, right? Because here's the deal. If it was white folks who were economically anxious, if it was just economic anxiety, black and brown folks would have flocked to Trump. Because black folks are twice as likely as white folks to be out of work at every level of education. So you look at black college grads, regardless of major, twice as likely as white folks with degrees to be out of work. Latinos with a degree, 50% more likely to be out of work than white folks with a degree. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders with a degree, 25% more likely to be out of work than white folks with a degree. Indigenous folks with a degree, 2/3 more likely to be out of work. So at every level of education, people of color are more anxious. Who got hit the hardest in the recession? People of color. And yet they didn't flock to Trump. So it can't be economics in a vacuum, right? But here's what I would say it is. And this is how race comes into it and intersects with class. I believe that those white folks, many of them, were economically anxious, but it was economic anxiety in a context of white, here's the word I'm going to use, and it's not a real word, but white privilege says I can just make some shit up, and it'll be in the dictionary next year, apparently. White expectationalism, right? The idea that white folks have always been able to say to ourselves, if we work hard, play by the rules, do everything right, keep our nose to the grindstone, go to school, work hard, everything will be fine, we'll have an education, our kids will have a better chance than we did, and people of color have never had the luxury of believing that. Right? Black and brown folks have never had the luxury of believing that if they just played by the rules and did everything right, everything would be okay. White folks, including some of those white folks in the Rust Belt, in manufacturing jobs, even in Appalachia, had the belief that, well, my daddy worked in the coal mine, and his daddy worked in the coal mine, and his daddy worked in the coal mine, so my son's going to work in the coal mine, and as long as he works hard, and he has a strong back and he can lift shit, he'll have a job. Well, that's whiteness speaking, right? That's white expectationalism saying you will always have an opportunity. And that, unfortunately, this is the irony of white privilege. See, white privilege sets some white people up to believe that their lives were predictable, and as long as they did things correctly, everything would be fine. And what white folks needed to know was what every black 14-year-old in this country knows, which is that this is all a lie and a con and a setup. See, every black kid in America knows that by the time they enter high school. And white folks are 35 years old, 45 years old, and just coming to terms with what their country really is. And so I think what we have is a bunch of white folks that could not deal with the reality that their country is not the country they had been told they had. That is about class, but that is definitely about race and whiteness. And so that's where those two things, to me, intersect.
So just a quick question. Is there any appropriate time to call somebody a racist?
I mean, David Duke's a racist. And the alt-right, neo-Nazi, white nationalist folks are racist. But I think it is more productive for us as a movement to say that actions are racist, policies are racist, practices are racist, systems are racist. I want us to get off of this trip where we're focusing on people as individuals. I want us to talk about racism as a system. Racism is a system. I am far more concerned, let's say, about the labor market. I'm far less concerned about the individual business owner who doesn't like black people than I am about the businesses that hire folks on the basis of old boys networks based on who they know and who's connected to them. Because let's be honest, there was a study 2 years ago, 3 years ago, found that half of the new jobs in the economy were being filled by way of letters of recommendation written by existing employees on behalf of people that wanted a job with that company. Now, that's not blatantly racist in the sense that you're necessarily trying to keep out certain people, but we know from that study who were the people that weren't likely to know somebody who could write them a letter. Well, it was black folks, it was people of color, generally it was women of all colors, And hell, it was even working class white dudes. That's what's so deep about it. You had working class white guys that didn't go to the right college, didn't play golf with the right guys, didn't belong to the same clubs, right? And they didn't know Jim over in the HR department or Tom over in the accounting department or whatever. So I'm more concerned about systems that perpetuate racism as a system than I am talking about, are you a racist, are you a racist, are you a racist? That shit is not productive. It's not that people aren't racist, it's that even people who are not outwardly racist perpetuate by their actions and their inactions racial inequality. We need to deal with racial inequality, not trying to change people's psychology. That takes, if you're a therapist and you're down for that, do that job. But the rest of us have got to deal with systems and procedures and practices and policies, because that's the stuff that actually kills people. That's the stuff that actually produces inequality in healthcare, education, criminal justice, etc.
So the follow-up to this oftentimes happens is we get groups of young people that come in here. We always have this conversation on race with our new hires. We bring them together, we sit them down, and we talk about how does race impact your life? How does it impact the way you work? How does it impact the way you live? All of these things. And I think that's an important conversation that should be had everywhere. But sometimes we get a lot of young people will come and say, you know what, I don't see race. For me, race is your issues. Or, you know, and frequently, I mean, most of the time it's the white hires that end up sort of saying that, but sometimes also young black people say that. So is that the ultimate goal, is to become a colorblind society?
No, the ultimate goal is to become a society of justice and equity. And I think justice and equity are impossible if we are colorblind. And if we are gender blind, class blind, sexuality blind. Equity requires that we see the various identities that are being marginalized. You cannot address racism and white supremacy, which is our particular form in this country of racism, if you don't see whiteness, if you don't see what it means to not be a member of that club. The idea that we can have colorblind justice, it's like, let me give you an analogy to point out the absurdity of this. So in 1991, the United States Congress passed and President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, yes? Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act took various measures and imposed certain measures and expectations on businesses, right? About how inclusive they had to be, about what kind of sort of practices they had to have to make sure they weren't discriminating on the basis of physical ability, etc. The idea that you could have addressed ableism with a disability blind policy is absurd, right? Like if you said, well, we're going to deal with disability, but we're not going to build any ramps in the building because that would be paying attention to disability and we're disability blind. What the hell, then? You can't solve that problem, right? The problem is based on the marginalization of people on the basis of their identity. So if you're going to fix that marginalization, you have to see that identity, right? If I had a magic wand and I could wave it over the whole country and make us all literally colorblind, where we could not see anyone's color or ascertain their cultural, ethnic, national, racial background, that would not be a good thing. Because, among other reasons, there are lots of reasons why I think it wouldn't be, but especially it wouldn't be because the inequalities that are already in place would then be impossible to fix because we wouldn't even know what brought them about. All we would know is some people were here and some people were here, and we wouldn't even realize to what extent that was about race. Well, a lot of it's about race. If you want to fix race-specific injury, you have to be conscious to the thing that provoked that injury, which was color. We have to be profoundly color conscious if we're going to solve a color conscious injustice.
I want to get into the personal a little bit more. I told a friend of mine, we had Tim Rice coming today, she said, well, if every white person was like Tim Rice, this would be a much better world. So this was a huge compliment from somebody who's very critical of a lot of issues, and especially issues of race. But I want to ask you personally, how was your journey? I know that you write about it, but I want you to share it with folks here. What made you do this kind of work? What made you be on the journey of being woke?
Well, first off, I'm not at all sure that if all white people were like me, it would be better. I think that's a stretch.
That was her quote.
It was nice of her to say that. I'm just saying I'm not going to say that that's necessarily true because I'm a horribly flawed person like everyone. Here's the thing. I think for any of us who are on this trajectory of learning about race and racism and privilege and inequality, there are a lot of steps along the road that bring us from point A to point B to point C and on down the road. And for me, and I wrote about this in White Like Me, which was my first book and my memoir and the most personal of all my books. I grew up in the South. I've lived in the South all my life. I'm from Nashville. I've lived in New Orleans for 10 years, and I've been back in Nashville for 20 years. I lived 5 months in Houston, but we don't talk about that for a lot of reasons. Anyone who's lived in Harris County will understand. And what made a difference to me was a combination of parental stuff, upbringing, and then the people that I met. I grew up in a home that was racially and politically very liberal and very progressive, not radical, not activist. My parents were born in 46 and 47, which is to say that they had been a little bit too young to have been actively involved in the early to mid-60s in Nashville at a time when the movement was very strong in Nashville. But, when the sit-ins happened in Nashville in February of 1960, my folks had been like 13 and 14. So needless to say, they weren't involved in that. But they were always very sort of emotionally, intellectually, politically in tune with that. And so I was raised in that context, right? And I always find it hard to, a lot of white folks that come up to me and they're like, how do I deal with my racist parents or my racist uncle at Thanksgiving? Which, by the way, I find it fascinating, like, everybody has a racist uncle at Thanksgiving. It's fascinating because uncles have kids, right? So somebody's got a racist dad. They're just not saying anything about that shit. They're just like, my racist uncle is out of control. Well, where's the racist dad in the picture? But for me, it's always been easy because I just cut those people out of my life and I didn't really have too many to cut out. I was very lucky in the sense that my family was pretty favorable toward creating this thing that sits here now. I went to preschool at a historically black college. My earliest childhood education experience at the age of 3, 4 years old was in a black preschool where all the kids, but 3 of us were black. Most of the teachers were black women. And I think that does something when you're young. We're talking 1972. But even today, there aren't a lot of white people who are, is that me or is that some weird shit that I have no control of? There aren't a lot of white people, even today, who at the age of 3 and 4 are subordinated to black authority. And I was. I mean, these black women ran this program at TSU, Tennessee State University. They could have put my white ass out of the program, and they would not have hesitated to do so if I acted up. So I was learning to respect black authority at a very young age. And I think what that meant was, 23 years later, when I was a community organizer in public housing in New Orleans, and I'm working with black women who are telling me, this is what's up, like this is what's happening in the community. I'm not going to be the asshole that's like, are you sure? Because I think you might be seeing things, right? I'm going to be the guy that goes back to that early imprinting and says, shit, you probably know your reality better than I know your reality, so maybe I should listen to you, right? So a lot of it has to do with that, but it also has a lot to do with, I went to college in New Orleans, I was at Tulane, a white plantation institution in the middle of a black city, let's be honest, that's what it is. And I met the most amazing people, mentors, friends, allies, people of color in the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, Ron Chisholm, Barbara Major, white allies as well in that organization, who really sort of, came up to me. I was an anti-apartheid activist in the 80s, like a lot of college students. And, they were nice enough to sort of come uptown to Tulane and sort of tap us on the shoulder and sort of say, yeah, it's really nice what you're doing about racism 8,000 miles away. Love that shit. Keep doing that. By the way, there's some stuff going on 6 miles down the road that you might want to check into. And because I'd had that opening with my family as an early kid, I was open to hearing that, and I was open to realizing that I wasn't nearly as fully formed or woke, right, as I might have thought myself to be at the age of 21. And 27 years later, you still realize, even with all of that background, you're still learning every single day.
It's amazing how often you hear these types of stories where people that interact with other people that are different than they are really do change. I mean, it's, I get when after, during the war with Iraq and build up to the war, there was a lot of conversation, especially Arabs and Jews were having a lot of issues. I'm of Arab background, and so I would go and speak at a synagogue, and people would come afterwards and say, "Well, you're one of the nice Arabs. I didn't know that. You're probably the small minority of Arabs that speaks like this." And I think that's a similar experience for a lot of people that haven't met people that are different than they are. I want to ask you about Barack Obama. Do you feel that we are more evolved on issues of race today than we were in 2008? Or do you think we have developed?
Well, I think we've reverted to type. D.L. Hughley made this comment the other day in an interview that he gave, and I thought it was very appropriate. He said it was sort of like being in a play, and Barack Obama was the intermission. Right? It was sort of like, yeah, y'all can look at your playbills now, and you can go get a drink and use the bathroom, but we'll be back in a minute. And when we get back, that shit is going to be what y'all knew it was. And then he used a phrase I won't use. Said, welcome back. And he said N-words, And I think that's sort of where we're at. I think, and this is not, by the way, President Obama's fault. This is the fault of a system and a society based on white supremacy. So the idea, this is like inarguable. What I just said ought to be the most simple, banal statement that anybody ever made about American history. It's not arguable. There's no other opinion to what I said about America being rooted in white supremacy. There's no rebuttal. There's no other side. There's no, that shit is just clear. But unfortunately, we act like that's not true, so then we look at 8 years of one administration as the thing that's going to solve us. Look, even if President Obama had been as radical as some folks on the right believed him to be, which was clearly rooted in delusion on their part, he could not have done in 8 years enough to dismantle white supremacy, even if he had gone in with that goal. And the idea that we're going to judge him for not having dismantled it, dismantling white supremacy, that's our job. That's not the job of the president. That's not the job of the Senate. That's not the job of the Congress. That's not the job of the mayor of whatever town you live in. That's our job. Anybody that gives away their agency to a president has not studied history. I expect the head of the empire to act like the head of the empire. Let me explain what that means. I realize there are differences between this head and that head. I realize that some heads of the empire are more destructive than others. But let's be honest, when you're the head of the empire, I don't expect you to come out and be like, oh yeah, I'm tearing all this shit down. I don't expect you to come out and just be like, yeah, that whole edifice that I got elected under, yeah, I'm wrecking that whole thing. I'm tearing it. That's not what you got elected to do. So it's our job. If we don't think that President Obama did all the things that we would have hoped, those of us on the left in particular, wish that he would have done, all right, that's partly on him and it's partly on us. Right? And if Donald Trump, George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, George H.W. Bush, every president we've ever had who's fallen short, it's because the system was set up. Look, it's like if you had a factory that was created to make sausage, if you stand at the end of the damn assembly line of the sausage factory and you keep saying to yourself, why do they keep giving us sausage? I want some chicken nuggets. Where the hell are my chicken nuggets? Well, look, fool, it's a sausage factory. That's what the sign says. It's intended to give you sausage. So if you want something other than sausage, you have to destroy the factory, non-violently, because I'm not about violence. You have to destroy the factory and build a new factory. You don't get to just come into the system and act like, oh, we're going to tweak it and we're going to throw some money this way and it's going to change. You have to actually refit the machine. And Barack Obama can't do that, right? Hillary Clinton sure as hell could not have done that. And Donald Trump surely will not do that. We have to force that. That is our job for the next 4 years, 8 years, 20 years, 50 years, every day that you're alive on this planet. That's your job.
Okay. When you mentioned the analogy of the play and the intermission, I'm thinking of it more of a disease and a remission. So the disease is already there. We're in a state of remission now. The symptoms are coming back up again, and we have to do maybe some chemotherapy now at this point. But anyway, I want to mention a few names, and I want you to react to them just for a moment. And I'm sorry about this back and forth microphone. It'd be an easier conversation if it wasn't, but I'm trying to ask kind of one of the questions, and the advantage we have here is Tim can talk. So this is fabulous. Thank you so much. So I want to talk about the Emancipation Proclamation a little bit. I am of the mindset that the Emancipation Proclamation had already a white supremacist kind of take to it, obviously, and I want to be able to see, like, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1962 here in Washington, D.C., 1863 went into effect. The whole idea of emancipating people for something that is not of their doing didn't make sense to me. The emancipation needs to have been done on white supremacy. And that would have turned it upside down. It would have changed the paradigm in which we look at the relationships of people of one race to another. I've always thought if a white person is able to give freedom to people, then they're able to take away the freedom, because that's something that should be to everybody. So I just want to rethink the Emancipation Proclamation for a moment. But I want you to react to Abraham Lincoln.
So, Lincoln was an incredibly flawed individual, as I think all of our presidents have been, and as most leaders of that time were, and of our time are, who clearly was not operating from an anti-racist front. That isn't to say that what Lincoln did was not beneficial to the nation, but it is to say that we can't romanticize Lincoln the way that we do, and that's what we do in our history books. That's what we do in our texts, beginning very early. We lionize Lincoln, we romanticize Lincoln, and by doing so, we don't only, and this is a really important point about the way we teach history, it's not just that we sort of paper over or whitewash, pun very much intended, his racism. Because, I mean, he did say, if he could figure out a way to repatriate black folks, he would. Like, he was not by any stretch committed to the abolition of white supremacy, even as he did not believe in the extension of slavery to the Western territories. So he was a, free soiler. But by not being honest about Lincoln's racism, and the racism that permeated most of white America at the time, not all, but most, we actually do a disservice to young people today who are learning American history. Because if I grow up with the idea that there are just demons and there are angels, right? If I grow up with the idea that over here are the good people and over here are the bad people, then I don't actually understand the complexity of the human experiment, which is that we're all a mixture of better and worse natures. Sometimes we act on the basis of our better natures, sometimes we act on the basis of our worse natures, And if we purely demonize Lincoln, we don't get the positive of it. If we lionize it, we don't get the positive of it. If we don't understand the complexity, white supremacy does it is a powerful drug. And it does a number on the brain of both white folks and people of color. And so we have to understand that so that we can understand people in their complexity, condemn them for what they deserve to be condemned for, acknowledge them for what they deserve to be acknowledged for, and realize that there are no demons and angels. There are just flawed humans in this process. The Emancipation Proclamation, very clearly, a flawed document for a number of reasons. In the sense that it was a strategic document that was intended to, tilt the trajectory of a war. I mean, it was a proclamation that says you're free if you're in one of the rebelling states, not so much if you're in one of the non-rebelling states. And of course, ultimately, even the 13th Amendment, incredibly flawed, right? In the sense that it says, well, you can't be a slave unless you did some shit that we convicted you for, and then actually you can be. Which is to say, slavery is not abolished in the United States. It is not, in fact, illegal to hold people in bondage as slaves even today. So let's just teach history accurately. I don't have any problem acknowledging some of the things that every one of these folks, from Lincoln to Jefferson to Hamilton to all of these folks did that was constructive, but I insist that we acknowledge the extent to which they perpetuated a system of white supremacy. If we can't do that, if we can't see people in their complexity, then we're doing a horrible disservice to folks, because then if somebody out there who's 11, 12, 13 years old, is struggling with their own views, has a racist thought, which we all tend to have because we're raised in that, has a sexist thought, has a classist thought, has some kind of bigoted thought, then they're inclined to believe, well, I guess I'm just a racist, and I have, and then they just give up because they don't realize people struggle with their biases and their, even every white ally. William Lloyd Garrison struggled, he wasn't a perfect ally. Let's be clear. Let's read his history. Let's understand he was no perfect ally. The Grimke sisters, they were not perfect allies. You go all the way back and you look at white folks in history who stood up against one form of oppression, but sometimes they ratified other forms. Bartolome de las Casas, who spoke out against Columbus and his treatment of Taino on Hispaniola, still had, at least early on, retrograde views about black folks. That doesn't mean that his voice wasn't relevant and wasn't important to critiquing Columbus, but it means he was complicated. And I think we just have to see people in their complication if we're going to deal with this system of white supremacy.
I want to give a big shout out to Michelle Alexander, who is obviously someone that's a huge supporter of yours, who of the New Jim Crow, and talks about this very issue that you just mentioned. Also, a big shout out to Teaching for Change, which is the organization that we're working with for many years to do our bookstore here. And they just recently, we had a trivia night with the Howard Zinn Project. Howard Zinn, of course, a great historian. But it was a trivia night here that was really fun, packed place to talk about the very issues that you speak about, many people here talk about. A couple more names that I want to bring up to you. Someone that was very critical of you, and someone I think you've had a back and forth with, Frances Cress Welsing. I know that she, God rest her soul, she just passed a few months ago, as a matter of fact. She did a talk here one time about this. She wrote, of course, ISIS papers, and you said some unkind words about her analysis, and I think maybe she has sent back some unkind words about what you say. Can you please talk a little bit about her perspective and why it's so troubling to you?
Well, let me be very clear about what I did and did not say about Dr. Welsing, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what I did and didn't say, and it's not based on honest misunderstanding, it's based on misrepresentation. And anyone who sort of chooses to seek out the threads of that will see that. What I said about Dr. Welsing was in regard to one element of her theory in ISIS papers and in the Cress theory. and that was that there is a thread in ISIS and in the crest theory that suggests incredibly homophobic, heterosexist, straight supremacist thinking that suggests that homosexuality is something white folks created to destroy black men. This is biologically nonsensical. There is clear evidence of homosexuality in 400 at least that I know of species on the planet. I'm assuming that white folks did not implant homosexuality in skunks and various forms of birds in order to destroy black folks. So when you say that homosexuality was created to destroy black people, that it is some white creation, even as Europe and European Christianity was the most homophobic, heterosexist, straight supremacist culture potentially in history, I think you are on very thin ground. I never critiqued in any way or said anything about the larger crest theory, which was not rooted in that. Her theory was not rooted in that. Her theory was that the key in her mind for white supremacy was the fear of white genetic annihilation, right? The idea that because when white mixes with non-white, it creates non-white, that white supremacy was a reaction to that as a way to maintain power and dominance when they were genetically recessive. Now, I don't necessarily believe that's the only reason. In fact, I would argue that no phenomena has one explanation, but I am more than willing and told her so, and have told other adherents of the crest theory so, that I am more than willing to believe that that is one of the reasons. I know people, listen, I've had conversations with white supremacists, overt white supremacists, who absolutely admit that that is why they believe in white supremacy. Because they want their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren to look like them and be white, and they don't want to be genetically annihilated. So she's absolutely correct that that is a motivator for some white folks. My argument would simply be that I believe there are also other motivators, including the desire to maintain economic power, economic position, that there's no singular, she was very fond of the idea of a unified field theory of race, right? It's just like we have a unified field theory of physics and all that. And I just am not convinced that there's one explanation for any phenomena, but I think that her theory added a lot to the dialogue, and her practice as a psychiatrist was brilliant and needed in this community, and I believe she did a lot of good in that regard. The only part of her theory that I ever went in on at all, because it is purely anti-scientific and proven wrong, is this idea that LGBT folks are not really organically LGBT, that it's just white supremacy that somehow tricked black folks into, like James Baldwin was gay, that's it. Like it wasn't, white folks didn't make James Baldwin gay. White folks didn't make Bayard Rustin gay, right? White folks didn't, white supremacy didn't do that shit. That was actually who folks were. And I feel like the idea that white supremacy somehow implanted homosexuality, bisexuality, or transgender identity in people of color is both anti-scientific and incredibly retrograde in a moment in time when we need to be embracing intersectionality. But 85% of what she said, I think makes perfect sense. It was just that part that I had an issue.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to electoral politics a little bit and bring up a couple of names, see why do you feel someone like Bernie Sanders was unable to attract black folks to the campaign? He seemed to have this sort of tone deafness when it comes to issues of race. It happens over and over again where you see white candidates that have a lot of great progressive ideas that would help all people of all races and certainly would help black folks. Why do you think he was unable to bring black people to his campaign?
Well, I think that Bernie, like a lot of white leftists who come from a economic, materialist orientation, a Marxist academic orientation, which is where and I'm not using that as a pejorative, I'm just saying that's the sociological school from which he derives his views. I think they tend to downplay race. And I think they do so in a way that it isn't necessary. You don't have to do that. You can be a white Marxist and still understand the intersections of class and race. But I think that Bernie does not fully appreciate the way that white supremacy and the class system intersect. And so when he talks about inequality, you know, it's sort of like the way Ralph Nader did in 2000. I remember Ralph Nader would say things like, you know, we have to restore American democracy. What the hell does that mean to black people? Like, American democracy has never been real for people of color. So it sort of comes from this privileged perspective of saying, the corporations, the oligopoly have stolen democracy. No, shit. Democracy was never a thing for people of color. You know, and so I think when you talk in those terms, when you talk about the 1% and the corporate elite, and you don't actually realize that it ain't just the 1%. You know, like, it's not just the top 1% or the 1/10 of 1% of white folks, mostly white folks, who are the problem. It's the fact that the vast majority of people are bought up in a system where they might not be the 1%, but they believe, by God, if I just work harder, I'm going to be. You know, and I'm bought into that system, and I believe in that system. I just want to be the guy that says, you're fired, right? I don't want to be the guy that gets fired. I want to be the one that says, you're fired. And that's why I'll vote for the guy who spent the last 7 years of his life saying, you're fired, to some celebrity that really didn't give a shit because they had plenty of money anyway, right? I mean, that's the thing. And so I feel like, in a way, Bernie Sanders couldn't connect because he's coming from this class reductionist place where everything's about class, and he can't see that class plays out differently. Like, the black middle class and the white middle class are very different, right? Like, the black middle class has 1/5, if we define middle class in terms of income and occupational status. The black middle class, so-called, has like 1/5 the net worth of the white middle class. Because the white middle class has got more inherited advantage. You know, they were able to get a little money or property from their parents that had an FHA loan in the 40s or the 50s, or, you know, a VA loan, or got benefits from the GI Bill, or whatever the hell it is. And even the black affluent upper middle class has at least 1/3, if not 1/5 the net worth of the white upper middle class and affluent. So at every level, right, you have to understand class alone. Like, the best example of this, Labor Department data says, if you look at white households that are headed by a high school dropout, the median net worth of a household headed by a white high school dropout is $52,000 a year. $52,000. The median household wealth for a household headed by a black college graduate is $26,000 a year. So a household headed by a white high school dropout, 10th grade education, double the household wealth of a household headed by a black person that went to college, got their degree, finished college. So you can't understand class unless you understand race. And I think that he did not and has not made the connection clear enough between those two things. That's not to say that Hillary Clinton did any better on it. It's not to say that anybody else did, but unless if you're gonna bring a class message about inequality that does not prioritize racial inequity and white supremacy, you're not gonna attract the votes of people of color in the way that you need to win a nomination. And so I think that hurt him, was not having a racial frame for his class analysis. Class analysis is critical, but you've got to have a racial frame for your class analysis, is what I'm trying to say.
To just piggyback on what you said, the Meyer Foundation put out a report here that just was released last week about the race divide that's here in the city. We don't have to go very far to see that. And it's a really pretty damning report on everything that you could possibly think about, whether it's housing or education or schools or income, and the inequality is so stark in the city and far exceeds many other jurisdictions that we have a lot of work to do here in our backyard. We don't have to go very far to look for opportunities to make a better world. I want to be able to maybe talk a little bit about what's upcoming. You know, with the Trump election, a lot of people, you know, trying to look at a positive way to see what is next. So many people feel that the system is broken anyway, that electing someone like Hillary Clinton would just kind of be that slow boil that people sort of don't recognize, and after a while things continue to deteriorate because things haven't improved greatly, economically certainly, for a lot of people under the last administration, so you can add them all up, that someone like a Trump in there, break it up, shake it up, and give opportunities for people to create movements and really kind of sort of grow out of the ashes, so to speak. What is your take on this? The idea of you need the chaos in order to fix it?
Well, whether we need the chaos or not, we have that shit. So we're going to have to deal with that. I will tell you that I think it's an incredibly dangerous, ahistorical, completely unsupportable theory. The idea that revolutions or substantial, radical, progressive change ever grows out of neo-fascist reactionary policies is simply not true. There has never been a time when things got worse and that's when they got better. I know some people, Susan Sarandon and others, said, oh, well, we just need shit to get really bad and then people will rise up. Yeah, that's not how revolutions actually work. That's not how radical change actually happens. If you look at the history of radical change, it is usually happens when things are getting a little better, but not better fast enough. In other words, if you look at the 60s, right? Civil rights movement, you look at some of the progress that was made, a lot of that progress programmatically came at a time where you look at why, for instance, there were rebellions in 65, 67, 68 versus 55, 57, 58, right? Because objectively, you could argue things were worse for black and brown folks in the mid-50s than the mid-60s. But you see these uprisings, these rebellions, which actually did result in money getting shaken loose for communities of color, Great Society programs, War on Poverty programs, Model Cities programs, programs that actually, until they were defunded in the early 70s, were making a substantial difference on poverty rates, literacy rates, all those things. The reason that stuff happened in the 60s and not the 50s, even though the 60s things were starting to theoretically get better, you had the Civil Rights Act, you had the Johnson administration proclaiming this war on poverty, was because there was what sociologists refer to as this gap between aspiration and achievement. So when you have an aspiration that's here, and your achievement of that is down here, people get pissed and they're like, oh my God, we gotta do something. But if your aspirations are in the toilet because everything is horrible, and the president is a total asshole, and somebody that doesn't believe in equality, then you're just trying to stay alive. You don't have the luxury of actually going out and organizing. You're so desperate to stay alive. So the idea that things get worse and then they get better, that's not what has happened in this country's history. It's not what has happened in virtually any country's history. Having said that, here we are. So we have to make something out of this moment. And I do believe that we can do that as long as we do not react. We can't be in a mode of simply reacting to the president and his tweets at 3 in the morning. We cannot simply react to what his Attorney General may or may not do, or what his Secretary of State may or may not do, or what his Supreme Court justices may or may not do. We have to hit the ground now. And the one thing that I will say is that as badly as things may look in the sense of this large sort of white lash, as Van Jones called it on election night, there is also something else happening in this country. First of all, in the last 3 years, there has been more active mobilization and radical mobilization of black and brown peoples leading a struggle for justice than what we have seen in the last 20 years. That's number one. That's not going to change. I expect that to intensify. Secondly, there is a movement of white solidarity in league with and in concert with those people of color that we have not seen in the last 50 years in this country, with groups like Surge showing up for racial justice and others who are trying to figure out what is our role going to be. So yeah, there are a bunch of white folks that elected Donald Trump. There are a bunch of white folks that are all on that train. And there are also 120 chapters of anti-racist white allies, aspiring allies all around this country trying to challenge our neighbors, trying to challenge our colleagues, trying to challenge our family members and figure out what the hell we do from this point on. That didn't happen 10 years ago. That didn't happen 15 years ago. It didn't happen 30 years ago, but it's happening now. And so the real question is not, is it going to be hard? It's going to be very hard. The real question is, are you ready to do the work? And maybe we got a little lazy in the sense that we thought we didn't have to do the work. But this right now, this is the work. This is what folks had to do in 1960. And this is what folks had to do in 1963 in Alabama. And this is what folks had to do in 1964 in Mississippi. So welcome to the struggle. And it begins today. And it goes on from this point forward.
I want to ask one last question, then we're going to have open it up for conversation with people that are standing in line here to ask questions. But I want to ask you about the relationship of race in this country. It's a very odd thing to have experienced coming from a different country, to land here and see race here is such an integral part of everything that happens in this country, where you live, who you interact with, what house you buy, where you live,
Where you buy your house.
where you go to school. All of these things are intertwined with race in such a serious way. And a lot of times I think, people feel like, or some people feel like in due time, generation after generation, that it will heal itself. That somehow we'll wake up one day and feel like, oh, we're all the same, aren't we, same kumbaya. And I come from a tribal culture where when you wrong somebody, you can only make it right by paying them.
Right.
If you hurt someone or if you kill someone from another tribe, there's no way to bring that back. You can't unhurt them and you can't unkill them, so you pay.
Right.
And there's a value for all of these things that is set by society. I want to bring up reparations. I'm of the mindset that without reparations, you can't erase the crime. I'd like to see your take.
Well, I agree. And I think we as a country will never really move forward until we do two things. One is narrative and one is monetary. The narrative piece is an acknowledgement that we've still not done about the way that white supremacy has damaged all peoples of color, not just people of African descent, indigenous people, folks whose half of their land in Mexico was stolen in a war of aggression, Asian Americans, many Chinese Americans brought to this country to build the railroads that built the transcontinental economy, and many thousands of them died on the railroads doing that work. So number one is an acknowledgement. The irony to me, right, is that what's the phrase that we use for people that sit back and watch oppression, right, and don't say anything? Think about it. What's the phrase? The phrase is good Germans. And yet, Germans, those in Germany do a far better job. And if you know anything about the way that they deal with the history of Germany in the schools there, you know this. They do a far better job of dealing with their history than we do of dealing with ours. And in fact, so much so that about 11 or 12 years ago, no, it's about 15 years ago, I wrote a piece about this because I live in Tennessee and I noticed there was a program that was being established for the people that were getting their GED, right? Folks that had dropped out of high school but wanted to get their equivalency diploma. And it was a program on tolerance, right? And so it was about teaching tolerance. And the entire curriculum was about the European Holocaust of European Jewry. Now, I'm Jewish, I get it, that's important. Okay, I get it, right? But I find it really ironic that the state of Tennessee was creating a program to acknowledge the genocide of an entirely different people half a century or more before on the other side of the world. As opposed to, because keep in mind, this program was devised and implemented 15 minutes drive from the home of Andrew Jackson. They could have just taken the class out to the Hermitage, sat them down amidst the oak trees and been like, genocide, discuss, right? But they didn't do that. They wanted to talk about European genocide. If you were to go to Berlin and you were to notice that they had a school program to talk about genocide, and the whole thing was about what we did to indigenous people, you'd probably be like, I think y'all are leaving out some shit, right? Because they would be. They'd be ignoring their own stuff. So number one, it's narrative. But secondly, it's material. You can't just acknowledge the truth. You have to make amends. Now, this is where white folks get freaked the hell out. And so I want to address the freak out so we don't get freaked out, so we can move forward with an understanding of what reparations means. I gather that white folks hear the term reparations and we think what that means is we're going to have to include a line item on our Excel spreadsheet for black people, right? Like every month there's going to be the water bill, the electric bill, the gas bill, and the black people bill. And then we're like, oh shit, I don't want to have to write that check. That is not what anybody is talking about. When they talk about reparations, it is not about individual white people sending money to black people, either individually or collectively. It is about saying, as a country, this country was built on the back of unearned labor. This country was built on the back of white supremacy. This country would not exist but for that. The wealth of this country would not exist but for that. So the country, through the general revenues of the government, and maybe even some private companies that can trace their lineage, like certain insurance companies and banks, that can trace their lineage to the days of enslavement and segregation and Jim Crow. They have an obligation to make things right. And it's a governmental obligation, right? It is a systemic obligation. It is not white people owe this to black people or to people of color. It is the government of the United States of America did this shit, and therefore, and the states did this shit, and therefore they owe this. And here's the thing. We've done reparations for people that weren't damaged nearly as much. What do you think? Well, first of all, we rebuilt Europe, the countries that we fought with after World War II. Then we did the FHA loan program, the VA loan program, and the GI Bill program disproportionately, if not exclusively, for white folks. So we've done this kind of stuff before. We created the white middle class with government intervention. We built the white middle class on the back of government, and then we're afraid to do that for black folks. All those of us who believe in reparations are saying is due for people of color what you already did for white people. $120 billion in preferential lending between 1934 and 1962 for white families under the FHA program. So do that shit for people of color. The GI Bill, the FHA loans, the VA loans, all of that stuff, we did that already for white folks. So it's not like we don't have a precedent for this. And anybody that's ever taken econ knows that if you put billions of dollars in the hands of people that don't have that now, that's not just going to help them. Basic econ says that money's going to get spent. It's this thing called a multiplier effect. It gets spent, and then it gets spent again, and then it gets spent again. It stimulates the economy. You want to have 5% growth, all that stuff Trump swears he's going to deliver? You're never going to get 5% growth if you don't put some money in the hands of black and brown people. I'll tell you that right now. And if you do put that money in the hands of black and brown people, you'll get 5% growth. You'll get more than that because you'll now have people that have been undercapitalized, able to be capitalized, able to spend their own money, build their own businesses, start their own futures, move forward in a way that doesn't require any help from white folk ever again. It doesn't require anything from white people ever again, if we would just move forward in that regard.
Some great ideas. There's also some ideas that are being put forward here in the city to try to start a trust fund for newborn, for any newborn here in the city that will establish them on a footing that is much more sustainable once they get old enough to be able to use that money. So I mean, those ideas are out there, and they certainly are much more effective than the type of stuff that Michelle Alexander writes about, of course. But I also was proposing an idea to say, because the idea of putting money in somebody's hand, I think, is important to be able to come up with the whole psychological thing behind reparations, not just the actual economic part of it, but to have a check mark on the tax returns. Just like we have a check mark now to give $1 for elections, if you want clean elections, you can also have an opportunity to put a check mark of how much money you want to give that goes to reparations. And I think that would be an effective way to do it. It'd be an easy thing to do politically, I don't know, in this climate it might be a little more difficult, but I think it's something that's doable. And it would be a start, it'd be something tangible that people can actually put a check mark and give, up to $100, $1,000, whatever is decided as the appropriate amount, but then it's not out of your pocket in a sense, but it's really kind of taking some taxes and reassigning them. So there's a couple of really good questions that came up from the audience. And again, I apologize because of the microphone situation that we're doing it this way. We were hoping we'd have a microphone walking around and all this stuff, but I'm sorry. So this is an interesting one. It says, imagine this room was filled with Trump supporters. What do you think is important to say to them? Welcome. You know what? Here's what I would say, and I do speak to folks like that on a relatively regular basis. What I would say to them is that I think for a long time this country has neglected and taken for granted working class folks of all colors, and has done a really good job pitting them against one another, so that now, 400 years after that process began, we have white and black working class people fighting each other over the scraps of a pie that none of them own. And if we're ever going to pull out, we're going to have to understand that history, and we're going to have to move together through that history. That history is one, and I've talked about this before, and I know some of you have seen the video because it's blown up big in the last 7 or 8 months. This 3-minute clip where I try to break down this history, but I'll do it even quicker now. We have a history, where rich white men, if you really wanted to sort of boil down American history in one phrase when it comes to race and class, the phrase would be that the history of America is the history of rich white men telling not rich white people that their problems are black and brown people. That's pretty much the entire history of America when it comes to race and class, all the way back to the colonial period. Telling white folks who were poor after Bacon's Rebellion, well, yeah, but you're better than them, and we're going to get rid of indentured servitude, and we're going to lift your status so that you're part of our team. And we're going to put you on the slave patrol just so you know that you're on our team. And then during the Confederate rebellion against the government, the rich folks saying, yeah, we're leaving because of white supremacy and slavery. They had no shame at the time. We lie about it now. But at the time, they were very blatant. They said it very clearly. They were quite proud of it. But how do you get poor people to fight? Because rich people don't fight. Rich people don't go to war. Rich people get a doctor to write a note that says they've got heel spurs so they don't have to go to Vietnam. That's what rich people do. You can Google that shit and figure out who I'm talking about if you don't already know. Rich people don't go to war, but rich folks wanted poor people in the South to go fight to protect their interest in slavery, which is crazy because poor white folks didn't own slaves. Poor white folks might have leased them every now and then, might have benefited psychologically, as W.E.B. Du Bois called the psychological wage of whiteness, but, poor white folks were like, yeah, we'll go fight to protect your stuff. That's crazy, right? But it's because white supremacy did a number on them and pitted them against one another. Union movement, same thing. Yet white labor unions would not bring black and brown folks into the union because it was going to reduce the professionalism of the craft. No, fool, it's going to double the size of your union. And when you go out on strike, if you don't have those people of color with you, that's who the boss is going to hire to replace your ass. So you'd have been better off getting together with them and figuring out how to overthrow this system. But in every generation, we've had rich white people who have told poor white people, or working class white people, or middle class white people, if you just follow me, you'll be rich. If you just follow me, you'll be the boss. If you just follow me, everything will be all right. And so I would say to those Trump folks, your pain is real. But it's like if I have a, and I've had this before, right? I'm a hypochondriac of like the first order. First of all, y'all need to know this about me. Like, I will consult Dr. Google way more than I need to.
Do not do that, by the way, pro tip. Never consult Dr. Google, because Dr. Google doesn't know what the hell Dr. Google's talking about. So if I get a pain on my side, I'm like, shit, it's cancer. I know I'm dying. I got a tumor. And that's never accurate or rarely accurate, right? But I freak out. I'm like, I got a pain. Okay, the pain is real. Right? My diagnosis is some bullshit. Like, my problem is, I don't know how to diagnose the actual problem that I have, and I'm freaking out, and I'm like, I think I know what it is. I think that it's this horrible thing that's going to kill me, when actually I just, like, slept on it funny. Or I picked up some luggage funny. So the pain of white working people is real. The diagnosis that they are offered and that they have accepted for the source of their pain is incredibly wrong. And it's not their fault for having accepted it, because you know what? We were raised to accept it. We were trained to accept it. And so I don't blame them for accepting it. I don't feel like blasting them for accepting it. I get it. Man, I started my work in 1990 and 91 in Louisiana working against David Duke, and when he ran for U.S. Senate and ran for governor. And 625,000 white people voted for David Duke. Man, he got 60% of the white vote in the Senate race, 55% in the governor's race. The only thing that separated those folks from me, you know, I could be arrogant and say, like, I'm just smarter than them, or I went to college, I learned all this shit, I understand, you know. But that's not it. The thing that separated me from them was just experience with my family and my life. I was lucky. I was raised in a certain context, and they were raised in another. I mean, I was Jewish, so I knew not to vote for the Nazi. There was that shit too, you know. But like beyond that, it was just about, I had these experiences over here that exposed me to some certain things, and they had some other experiences that exposed them to some different things. I wasn't like inherently better than them, right? And so once you accept that, then I don't need to judge Trump voters, you know, even as easy as it is to do so. That's not helpful. The issue is to figure out, how is it that folks in pain are so ready, 400 years on now, to blame people that didn't create their pain for the pain that they have? That's what we have to figure out. And what none of us really have figured out yet, but that's the job of the future of this country.
And you wrote a book called Dear White People that they could read as well.
Well, Dear White America, Dear White People's a movie.
Dear White America, I'm sorry. So there's another question that says, name 3 to 5 things that each person should do this week to support racial justice. I wrote 5 things, if you don't mind me sharing them. So, number 1, this was written right after Trump got elected. I said, number 1, challenge racism. Family and close friends are a good place to start. Try calling them in before calling them out. Number 2, don't wear a safety pin. I know that you want to show that you're in and you're not a racist, but a safety pin is not the way. People are affected by racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and other isms know who their allies are. They just do. Number 3, read books and writings by current black and brown writers. Number 4, I'll leave that one to number 5. Number 4, expose yourself to races and cultures other than yours. Be more inclusive. Go to museums, church, concert, anything. See Jacob Lawrence's Migration series at the Phillips Collection that we have here. And number 5, and I think that's kind of really probably the most important, is be prepared to be uncomfortable. I think that's really the key for change. So I want to ask you, what are 3 to 5 things you would do, or advise people to do?
Well, I would state all of those that you just said, because many of those are among the ones I would have said. I would add to that just a few things. I think that I'm going to give some advice, particularly for white folks, and then for people of color, and I'm very cautious about the advice I give to folks of color, because as a white man, I don't bear the cost of whatever advice I give you. So I'm going to give that very, very cautiously, and with a recognition of the fact that ultimately black and brown judgment has to supplant my judgment for black and brown people.